The FIA cleared Hamilton, and that single decision may have just made every driver on the grid furious. Because this was not a harmless technicality. Hamilton went through a yellow flag situation at Silverstone after a high-pressure fight with Max Verstappen with a podium and crucial points on the line. A penalty could have changed the British Grand Prix result. It could have taken third place away. It could have turned Ferrari's podium into another post-race disaster. But the FIA did not give him a time penalty. And that is where the controversy begins. Because when the governing body says there was not enough evidence for a major sanction, every other driver immediately wants to know the same thing. What counts as enough evidence? A yellow flag is supposed to mean danger. Slow down. React. Respect the warning. No debate. But if Hamilton avoids a race-changing penalty because the warning timing, visibility, or information was not clear enough, then the entire grid has a new question to answer before the next race. Will the same standard protect everyone? Or did Silverstone just create a gray area around one of Formula One's most important safety rules? That is why this decision is bigger than Hamilton. It is about FIA consistency. It is about yellow flag enforcement. It is about driver safety. It is about whether a warning that arrives too late can still be used to punish someone at full speed. And by the end, the real question will not be whether Hamilton escaped. It will be whether the FIA has just created a precedent that every driver will challenge the next time the lights go yellow. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this decision could anger the rest of the grid, you have to start with the one thing every Formula One driver depends on. Certainty, not comfort, not luck. Certainty. A driver needs to know that when a yellow flag appears, the rule is the same for everyone. Slow down. Show a clear reaction. Be ready for danger. Do not overtake. Do not treat the zone like normal racing. That sounds simple, but Hamilton's Silverstone case made it feel complicated. Because the question was not only whether Hamilton passed through a yellow flag situation. The question was whether he had enough clear information to react before the moment was already almost gone. And that is where the entire grid starts paying attention. Drivers do not only care about punishments when they happen to them. They study every FIA decision because every decision becomes a clue. It tells them how the rules may be applied next time. It tells them what kind of evidence matters. It tells them whether visibility, timing, steering wheel alerts, light panels, and racing context can change the outcome. So when Hamilton avoided a time penalty, every driver had a reason to ask the same question. Would I get the same treatment? That is the dangerous part. Because yellow flags are not like tire strategy or pit stop timing. They are not about gambling for performance. They are safety commands. They exist because something has happened on track that could put people at risk. A stopped car, debris, a marshal nearby, a dangerous section. A driver has to respond immediately. But Hamilton's case raised the issue every driver fears. What happens when the warning is not immediate? What happens when the driver is already committed? What happens when the signal is late, brief, unclear, or mixed with another message? That is not an excuse to ignore danger. It is the reality of racing at extreme speed. Inside the car, a driver is not watching the race like a fan. He is not seeing every camera angle. He is not hearing every explanation. He is not able to rewind the moment and decide calmly what he should have done. He has the track ahead, the mirrors behind, the lights around him, the display on the steering wheel, and the voice of his engineer. That is it. And all of it arrives while the car is moving at terrifying speed. Now put that into the Silverstone context. Hamilton had been in a fight with Max Verstappen. That alone changes the mental load. After an overtake, especially against Verstappen, a driver keeps looking behind. He expects a counterattack. He protects the line. He watches for the next move. That means his attention is already divided. Then a yellow flag situation appears. If the warning is clear, early, and obvious, the driver has no room to argue. He must react. If he does not, the penalty should be serious. But if the warning arrives late, or if the visible signal is not clearly yellow, then the FIA is no longer judging a simple refusal to slow down. He's judging whether the driver had a fair chance to understand the danger in time. That is the line Hamilton's case exposed. And that line matters to every driver. Because nobody wants yellow flag rules to become soft. No driver wants marshals or rivals placed in danger. No driver wants a system where someone can blast through a warning and then claim confusion afterward. But drivers also do not want to be punished harshly for information they did not clearly receive. That balance is extremely difficult. And if the FIA does not explain that balance perfectly, anger grows. One driver might think, if I lift more than Hamilton did next time, I could lose position. Another might think, if I lift less, I could get punished. A third might think, the standard depends on what the stewards decide afterward, not what I can understand in the moment. That is where uncertainty becomes dangerous. Because yellow flag response should be instinctive. Danger ahead. Slow down. No calculation. But when a high-profile case ends with no time penalty, the grid naturally starts calculating. How late was the warning? What did the driver see? What did the data show? What counts as a clear reduction? How much does context matter? How much does a battle with another car matter? That is why the reaction can become furious. Not because every driver hates Hamilton. Not because every driver wanted him punished. Because every driver wants a rule that protects them, judges them fairly, and applies to everyone equally. And Hamilton's case puts pressure on all three. It pressures safety because yellow flags must be respected. It pressures fairness because the evidence must prove the driver had a real chance to comply. It pressures consistency because the next driver in the same situation will demand the same standard. That last part is the biggest one. Consistency. Formula One drivers can accept strictness. They can accept a harsh rule if it is predictable. They can accept being told, under any yellow flag, lift clearly or face punishment. That may be brutal, but at least it is clear. They can also accept mitigation if the FIA says we will judge what the driver could actually see when the warning appeared and whether reaction time was realistic. That can also be fair. But what they cannot accept is not knowing which approach will be used next time. Because uncertainty changes behavior. And when behavior changes around yellow flags, safety is at stake. That is why the FIA has to be careful now. If Hamilton was cleared of a race-changing penalty because the evidence showed the warning was not clear enough, then the FIA needs to make that standard clear. It needs to explain that this was not a loophole. It was not special treatment. It was not a weakening of yellow flag rules. It was a decision based on evidence. That is the only way the ruling survives. Because without that explanation, the paddock hears a different message. The message becomes, a driver can miss a yellow flag and still avoid a time penalty. That is dangerous. That is not the message the FIA wants. The message should be, a driver will not receive a major sanction unless the evidence shows he had clear warning, enough time to react, and still failed to comply. That is very different. One sounds like softness. The other sounds like due process. And Formula One needs due process, especially when a podium is on the line. A time penalty after the race is not a small correction. It can rewrite the Grand Prix. It can change points. It can alter the championship. It can punish a driver when he has no chance left to fight back on track. So the evidence has to be strong. But the safety rule also has to remain strong. That is the tension. And every driver knows it. They know that if the FIA punishes too easily, any unclear warning can become a disaster for them. But if the FIA clears too easily, yellow flags lose authority. Neither option is acceptable. That is why this case feels like a trap for the FIA. Clear Hamilton, and people ask if yellow flags are being enforced strongly enough. Punish Hamilton, and people ask if a driver was penalized for a warning he barely had time to process. There is no easy answer, but there is a necessary one. Clarity. The FIA has to make the reasoning so clear that drivers understand the standard before the next incident, not after it. Because the next yellow flag will come. It always does. Maybe it will happen during a restart. Maybe in traffic. Maybe after a crash. Maybe when a driver is fighting wheel to wheel and looking in the mirrors. Maybe at a circuit where the light panels are hard to spot at speed. And when it happens, every driver will remember Silverstone. They will remember Hamilton. They will remember the decision. They will remember the debate. And they will ask themselves, how much do I need to slow to be safe? And how much will the FIA expect me to prove afterward? That is not where Formula One wants drivers' minds to be. A yellow flag should not create a legal calculation inside the cockpit. It should create an immediate safety reaction. That is why this decision matters more than one podium. It is about the trust between drivers and race control. Drivers accept danger. They accept pressure. They accept that one mistake can ruin a weekend. But they need to believe the system judging them is clear, stable, and fair. When that belief cracks, every ruling becomes personal. Every investigation becomes political. Every penalty becomes suspicious, and every non-penalty becomes controversial. That is the road the FIA has to avoid. Hamilton's clearance may have been defensible. It may have been based on the weakness of the evidence. It may have been the fairest possible decision in that specific moment. But the FIA now has to prove it was not just a one-off. It has to prove the rule still means what drivers think it means. Danger ahead. Slow down. But also, clear warning required. Fair evidence required. Same standard for everyone required. That is the only way this controversy stops being a weapon for the next argument. Because right now, the question hanging over the grid is simple. If Hamilton escaped because the warning was unclear, will the next driver escape too? And until the FIA answers that clearly, the anger will not disappear. But the next layer is where this stops being a Hamilton story and starts becoming a grid-wide problem. Because once the FIA clears one driver from a race-changing penalty, every other driver immediately studies the reason. Not emotionally, professionally. They want to know the standard. They want to know the line. They want to know what will happen when they are the ones entering a yellow flag zone at full speed, with a rival in the mirrors, a steering wheel full of information, and only a fraction of a second to make the right decision. That is where the anger begins. Because Formula One drivers are not just arguing about Hamilton keeping a podium. They are looking at the precedent. They are asking what the ruling means for them. They are asking whether the FIA has made yellow flag enforcement clearer or more confusing. And that distinction matters. A clear rule makes drivers safer. A confusing rule makes drivers calculate. And yellow flags should never become a calculation. When a driver sees yellow, the reaction should be automatic. Slow down. Be alert. Prepare for danger. Protect the people ahead. Protect the marshals. Protect the stopped car. Protect everyone involved. But Hamilton's case introduced a more complicated question. What happens when the driver does not clearly see yellow in time? That is not a loophole. That is a safety problem. Because if the warning is late, the driver's reaction is late. If the signal is unclear, the driver's behavior becomes harder to judge. If one light panel shows green, and another warning arrives briefly on the steering wheel, then the driver is being asked to process conflicting reality at racing speed. And that is why the rest of the grid would be furious.